Hey everyone, welcome back. We know you're all busy people, and trying to keep up with every twist and turn in the world of AI, well, it can feel like a full-time job in itself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Who has time to wade through mountains of research papers and dense articles? But hey, that's why we're here.
Exactly. We do the deep dives for you.
We bring you the need-to-know insights, the stuff that's actually going to make a difference and, spark some really interesting conversations.
And speaking of interesting conversations, today we're tackling a topic that's been a bit of a head-scratcher for AI researchers, philosophers, and really anyone who's curious about the future of, well, thinking machines. We're talking about the Turing test.
Right, the Turing test.
Yeah.
So, it's been around for a while. Alan Turing first proposed it way back in 1950, and, this was even before we had, the first commercially available computer.
Yeah, 1950. I mean, think about that. This guy was already thinking about how to figure out if a machine could think like a human back when computers were, room-sized behemoths. Pretty amazing, right?
Totally. And the way he envisioned it, this imitation game, as he called it was so simple yet so brilliant. Basically, you've got a human judge, the interrogator, and they're having a typed conversation with two other entities.
Okay, so it's all text-based, right?
Right. Text only, no voice or video. And the kicker is one of those entities is another human and the other is a machine.
So the interrogator's job is to figure out which is which, right?
Right.
Like, are they talking to a real person or a cleverly programmed computer?
Exactly. And both the human and the machine are trying to convince the interrogator that they are the real human. It's like a high-stakes game of who's the human played out through words.
And if the machine can fool the interrogator, well, that's traditionally been seen as a sign that it's achieved some level of human-like intelligence.
Right. And that's where the debate really gets going. Because, is it really about intelligence? Or is it just about being good at imitation?
Well, and that's a question that's gotten even more complex with all the advancements we've seen in AI, especially lately with large language models, the LLMs everyone's talking about. Because these models, they are incredibly good at generating human-like text.
Oh, for sure. And that's kind of a double-edged sword for the Turing test, isn't it? Because on the one hand, it makes the test more relevant than ever. Like, can these LLMs actually pass it?
Right. But on the other hand, it raises the question of, well, what does passing the test even mean anymore? If an LLM can produce text that's indistinguishable from a human's, does that automatically make it intelligent?
Yeah, it's tricky because, the Turing test wasn't designed to be a perfect measure of intelligence. Turing himself admitted that. It was more of a thought experiment, a way to start thinking about what it would mean for a machine to think.
Right. And back then, he couldn't have even imagined the kinds of AI we have today. So, it's no wonder that the Turing test is still causing so much controversy. There are some who argue that it's too anthropocentric, that it focuses too much on human-like intelligence, and doesn't account for other forms of intelligence that might exist.
Right, and then there are others who say that it's too easy to game, that you could have a machine that's really good at mimicking human conversation without actually being intelligent at all. Like the classic example of Eliza, that chatbot from the 60s. Eliza was surprisingly good at mimicking a therapist, but it didn't actually understand what it was saying.
Yeah, the whole Eliza effect, where people start attributing human-like qualities to machines, even when those machines are basically just following a script. So yeah, the Turing test has definitely had its share of criticism. But, even with all its flaws, it's still an important benchmark. It forces us to ask some really fundamental questions about what it means to be human, what it means to think.
Exactly. I think, at the end of the day, the Turing test isn't about finding a definitive answer to those questions. It's about exploring them, provoking us to think deeper about the nature of intelligence and consciousness.
I like that. So where does that leave us with all these super smart LLMs we have now? Are they getting closer to passing the Turing test?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, right? And it's something that researchers are actively investigating. There have been some really interesting studies lately that have put these LLMs through their paces in Turing test-like scenarios.
And what have they found? Are these LLMs actually fooling people into thinking they're human?
Well, the results have been, shall we say, intriguing. Some studies have shown that certain LLMs, especially GPT-4, can be pretty convincing. Like in some cases, they've been able to fool a significant percentage of people.
Wow, so they're getting closer. But I guess the question is how close? Have any of them actually passed a rigorous Turing test?
Well, that's what we're going to dive into today. There's this really fascinating study that just came out that specifically looked at whether these state-of-the-art LLMs can pass the classic Turing test. The original three-party version where you've got a human interrogator, a human witness, and a machine witness, all trying to convince the interrogator that they're the human.
Ooh, okay, so this is the real deal, the full Turing test experience. So which LLMs did they use?
Well, they tested a few different ones, but the two that really stood out were GPT-4.5, which is, one of the most advanced LLMs out there, and then Llama 3.1 4005B.
Llama 3.1 405B, that's another one of those big, powerful models, right?
Exactly. And for comparison, they also included GPT-4o, which is a variant of GPT-4, and Eliza, the classic rule-based chatbot, as kind of a baseline.
Okay, so we've got the contestants. Now, how do they actually set up the test?
So they had a bunch of participants, over 280, a mix of undergrads and people recruited online. And each participant had to do 8 rounds of the Turing test, sometimes as the interrogator and sometimes as the witness.
And when they were the interrogator, they always had 2 witnesses, right? One human, one AI.
Right, and they had to chat with both of them simultaneously through a text interface. So it was like having 2 separate conversations going on at the same time, which is, a pretty challenging task for the interrogator. And they only had 5 minutes to figure out which one was the AI.
Wow, 5 minutes. That's not a lot of time. So how did the LLMs do? Were they able to fool the interrogators?
Well, here's where it gets interesting. It really depended on how the LLMs were prompted. They tested 2 main types of prompts. One was a minimal, no persona prompt, which basically just told the LLM to try and convince the interrogator that it was human.
Okay, so no specific personality or backstory for the LLM, just kind of a blank slate.
Right. And then the other prompt was a more detailed persona prompt, where they gave the LLM a specific personality to play. Like, for example, they told it to act like a young, introverted person who's really into internet culture and uses a lot of slang.
Interesting. So basically, they were trying to see if giving the LLMs a more human-like persona would make them more convincing.
Exactly. And that persona thing turned out to be a really big deal because when GPT 4.5 was given the persona prompt, it was judged human 73% of the time.
73%. Wow, that's pretty high. So basically, almost 3/4 of the time, people thought they were talking to a real human when it was actually GPT 4.5 with a persona.
Yeah, and that's significantly more often than the interrogators correctly identify the actual human witness.
Yeah.
So it's like GPT 4.5, with the right prompting, was actually more convincing at being human than humans themselves.
That's crazy. And what about Llama 3.1? Did it do as well?
Llama 3.1, with the persona prompt, was judged human 56% of the time. Now, that's not statistically higher than chance, but it's still pretty impressive, right? Like, over half the time, people couldn't tell the difference.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. So I guess the persona thing really did make a difference. What about the other models? How did they do?
Well, the baseline models, Eliza and GPT-4o without a persona, they performed pretty poorly, like significantly below chance. Which, is kind of what you'd expect. I mean, Eliza is a really old chatbot, and GPT-4o without a persona is basically just a language model. It doesn't have any social skills to speak of.
Right, so it seems like having that persona, that specific personality to embody, really helped the LLMs to connect with the interrogators on a more human level.
Absolutely. And, that's a really important finding because it suggests that the key to passing the Turing test might not just be about raw language processing power. It's also about having a believable personality, being able to engage in social interactions in a way that feels natural and authentic.
That makes sense. So, I mean, what are the implications of this? Like, if these LLMs are getting so good at mimicking humans, what does that mean for the future?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? And I don't think there are any easy answers. But I mean, one thing it definitely means is that the line between human and machine is getting blurrier. Like, if you can't tell the difference between a real person and an AI in a text conversation, then what does that say about the nature of communication, of identity, of intelligence itself?
Yeah, that's pretty mind-blowing stuff. And it raises all sorts of ethical and societal questions, doesn't it? Like,
Right.
if we're interacting with AI that we can't distinguish from humans, I mean, how does that change our relationships, our trust, our sense of reality even?
Exactly. Like, imagine if you're having a heart-to-heart with someone online and it turns out they're not even human.
Yeah.
Or you're getting advice from a financial advisor or even a therapist, and you have no idea that you're actually talking to an AI. It's kind of creepy, right?
Yeah, it is. But it's also, kind of fascinating because it forces us to confront what it really means to be human in a world where machines are becoming more and more like us.
Right. Like, what makes us unique? What are those essential human qualities that can't be replicated by a machine?
Big questions, for sure. So I guess we don't really have any definitive answers yet, but this study definitely gives us a lot to think about. And, it's exciting to see how the Turing test is still relevant, how it's pushing us to explore the boundaries of intelligence and technology.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the coolest things about AI research. It's not just about building smarter machines. It's about understanding ourselves better.
Well said. So that's it for today's deep dive, folks. We hope you enjoyed this exploration of the Turing test and the future of AI.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
And as always, keep those brains buzzing, and we'll catch you next time.
See you then.